Antarctica exists at the edge of what humans can endure. Its surfaces do not welcome passage. The ice extends in all directions without interruption, white merging into white, horizon indistinguishable from sky. The continent holds no permanent human settlement, only temporary stations perched at intervals along the coast, staffed by scientists who rotate through on strict schedules. In November, the Antarctic spring offers slightly longer daylight, though the temperature remains deeply sub-zero. The Ross Sea region near McMurdo Sound lies beneath the shadow of Mount Erebus, an active volcano rising 12,500 feet above sea level. Its summit vents steam continuously. The mountain dominates the landscape of Ross Island, visible from vast distances across the ice shelf. In clear weather, it can be seen from 100 miles away. In poor visibility, it disappears entirely. Air New Zealand operated sightseeing flights to Antarctica beginning in 1977. These were marketed as day trips, a chance for paying passengers to observe the continent from the air without landing. The flights departed from Auckland, crossed the Southern Ocean, descended to low altitude over the ice, and returned the same day. The route was planned to follow the McMurdo Sound coastline, providing views of the American Research Station and the surrounding ice formations. The aircraft used was a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, a wide-body jet capable of carrying several hundred passengers. Flight 901 on November 28, 1979, carried 237 passengers and 20 crew. Most were New Zealanders, some were families. The tickets were expensive but popular. Antarctica remained inaccessible to most people, and the flight offered a rare proximity to the continent without the cost or difficulty of an expedition. The crew was experienced. Captain Jim Collins had logged more than 11,000 flight hours, though he had not flown the Antarctic route before. First Officer Greg Cassin was similarly qualified. Flight engineer Gordon Brooks completed the cockpit team. All three had been briefed on the route, but none had personally flown it. The route itself was programmed into the aircraft's inertial navigation system, a computerized system that guided the plane along a series of predetermined waypoints. The coordinates for these waypoints were entered into the system before departure. The flight plan called for the aircraft to descend to a low altitude once over Antarctica, allowing passengers clear views through the windows. The descent was legal and had been performed on previous flights without incident. Visibility was expected to be adequate. The night before the flight, a change was made to the flight plan. A minor correction to one of the waypoints was entered into the navigation system. The adjustment shifted the route approximately 25 miles to the east. The change was not communicated to the flight crew. There was no formal briefing. The alteration was processed as a routine update, not recognized by ground operations as significant. The new route directed the aircraft toward the western slope of Mount Erebus, rather than along the coastline of McMurdo Sound. The crew departed Auckland believing they were following the same path as previous flights. Flight 901 crossed the Southern Ocean without incident. Communication with McMurdo Station was established. The weather over Ross Island was reported as variable. Some cloud cover existed, but conditions were not considered prohibitive. The aircraft began its descent as planned, dropping from cruise altitude toward the ice. The crew reported their position and intentions over the radio. There was no indication of concern. Passengers moved toward the windows. Camera shutters clicked. The descent continued. The aircraft was flying directly toward Mount Erebus. The slope of the mountain rises gradually from the ice shelf, creating an optical phenomenon known as whiteout. In such conditions, the snow-covered ground and the overcast sky merge into a single field of white. Depth perception is lost. Shadows disappear. The horizon ceases to exist. A rising slope can appear flat. The crew could see ahead, but what they saw offered no contrast, no definition. The instruments showed altitude above sea level, but the ground proximity warning system, which detects terrain directly below the aircraft, did not activate because the mountain was ahead, not beneath. The crew believed they were over flat ice. They were descending toward a slope. At approximately 12:49 p.m. local time, the ground proximity warning system triggered. A recorded voice in the cockpit announced, "White out, white out." The crew reacted immediately, applying full thrust and pulling back on the controls. The engine spooled up, the nose lifted. The response was correct and immediate. It was not enough. 6 seconds after the warning, the aircraft struck the lower slope of Mount Erebus at an elevation of 1,500 feet, traveling at over 200 knots. The impact was catastrophic. The fuselage disintegrated on contact. Wreckage scattered across the ice and rock. There was no fire. The fuel vaporized in the cold. All 257 people aboard died instantly. The wreckage was not immediately located. McMurdo Station lost radio contact and initiated search procedures. Weather over Ross Island deteriorated. Helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft from McMurdo began searching the area, but visibility was poor. It was several hours before the wreckage was spotted on the slope of Erebus. The site was remote and difficult to access. The angle of the slope and the altitude made helicopter operations dangerous. Recovery teams were deployed the following day. The scene was described as incomprehensible. Metal and ice were mixed together. Personal effects were scattered over a wide area. Bodies were frozen in place. The cold preserved everything. Recovery operations continued for weeks. The New Zealand government dispatched military personnel to assist. The United States provided logistical support from McMurdo. More bodies were transported back to New Zealand in stages. Identification was slow. Wreckage was photographed and catalogued. The cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder were retrieved and sent to investigators. The cause of the crash was not immediately clear. Speculation centered on crew error, mechanical failure, or weather. The investigation would take months. The cockpit voice recorder revealed that the crew had no awareness of the mountain ahead. Their conversation in the final minutes was calm. They discussed the view, the descent, the position of the aircraft. There was no alarm until the ground proximity warning. The flight data recorder confirmed the sequence of events: steady descent, sudden warning, immediate reaction, impact. The instruments had functioned correctly. The engines had responded. The crew had followed procedures. The question was why they had been flying toward a mountain. The investigation focused on the navigation system. Analysis of the waypoints revealed the change made the night before departure. The coordinates had been altered, shifting the route eastward. The crew had not been informed. They had flown the route they believed was correct, unaware that the programmed path had changed. The chart they carried showed the old route. The navigation system flew the new one. The aircraft had been precisely where the computer directed it. The crew had trusted the system. The system had been silently reprogrammed. The inquiry examined why the change had not been communicated. The alteration had been processed as a minor administrative correction, not a substantive change to the flight path. No one in ground operations had recognized that moving the route 25 miles eastward would place it directly in line with Mount Erebus. The mountain was well known, clearly marked on charts, but the implications of the coordinate change were not assessed. The crew, unfamiliar with the specific terrain, had no reason to suspect the route had shifted. They descended in conditions that obscured the rising slope, believing they were over flat ice. The term whiteout became central to the investigation. Pilots and Antarctic personnel testified that such conditions were common and disorienting. The human eye cannot detect a rising snow slope against an overcast sky. The brain interprets the visual field as level. The phenomenon is well documented. Several witnesses described near misses in similar conditions. The crew of Flight 901 had no reason to doubt what they saw, and what they saw was an undifferentiated field of white. The instruments contradicted nothing in their perception until the final seconds. The disaster was ruled the result of several compounding factors: the unannounced navigation change, the lack of communication to the crew, the descent into whiteout conditions, and the limitations of the terrain warning systems of that era. Blame was debated for years. For Air New Zealand initially suggested pilot error. The crew's families and the pilots' union contested this strenuously. A Royal Commission of Inquiry, led by Justice Peter Mahon, concluded that the airline had committed a series of organisational failures that contributed directly to the crash. Mahon used the phrase "an orchestrated litany of lies" to describe the airline's initial response. The comment was controversial and later struck from the record on procedural grounds, but it reflected the depth of institutional failure revealed by the investigation. The crash site on Mount Erebus remains largely undisturbed. Much of the wreckage is still there, embedded in ice and volcanic rock. The environment is too harsh and remote for full removal. The site is protected. Access is restricted. Over time, the ice has shifted slightly, but the debris field is still visible from the air. Bodies that could not be recovered remain on the mountain. The cold preserves them. Some fragments of the aircraft have been retrieved over the years for further analysis or commemoration, but most of the wreckage is permanent. The families of the victims travelled to Antarctica in subsequent years. Memorial services were held near the site. A cross was erected on a ridge overlooking the crash location. The New Zealand government provided support for these journeys, recognising the need for closure. The remoteness of the site made grief harder. There was no grave to visit, no place that felt like rest. The mountain itself became the memorial. Air New Zealand ceased Antarctic sightseeing flights immediately after the crash. No similar commercial operations resumed for decades. The disaster reshaped aviation safety protocols, particularly regarding route changes and crew notification. Procedures were formalised to ensure that any alteration to a flight plan was communicated explicitly to the cockpit crew. Terrain awareness and warning systems were improved. The DC-10 aircraft type, already under scrutiny following other incidents, faced increased regulatory pressure, though the Erebus crash was not attributed to a design flaw in the aircraft itself. The event remains the deadliest accident in New Zealand's history. It is studied in aviation safety courses worldwide as a case of organisational failure, communication breakdown, and the subtle dangers of automated systems. The crash demonstrated that sophisticated technology, when paired with inadequate oversight and human assumptions, can lead to disaster even when individual components function as designed. The crew did nothing wrong with the information they had. The system failed them. Mount Erebus continues to vent steam. The ice persists. The continent remains as indifferent as it was before the crash. The mountain did not act. It simply existed where the navigation system pointed the aircraft. The disaster was not the result of a single error, but a convergence of decisions, assumptions, and environmental factors that together created a scenario with no margin for correction. The 6 seconds between warning and impact were insufficient. The whiteout erased the world. The mountain was invisible until it was too late. The story is remembered not for drama, but for its quiet accumulation of missteps. No one intended harm. The passengers trusted the airline, and the crew trusted the navigation system. The ground staff trusted the administrative process. Each link in the chain was routine until it was not. The result was total. The cold absorbed everything. The wreckage froze in place. The bodies remained where they fell. Recovery teams worked in silence. There was nothing theatrical about the aftermath. It was methodical, exhausting, and sorrowful. In the years since, the crash has been referenced in discussions of human factors in aviation, the limits of automation, and the responsibilities of institutions to those they serve. It is taught as a lesson. The families sought accountability, and some measure of it was achieved, though justice could not undo what occurred. The mountain does not remember, the ice does not mark time the way humans do, But the name Erebus, once simply a geographical feature, now carries weight beyond geology. It is a reminder that even in an age of technology and planning, the margin for error remains narrow and the consequences of oversight can be absolute. The flight was supposed to return to Auckland that evening. Families waited at the airport. The delay stretched. Confusion turned to fear. The confirmation came in stages. The silence from the ice was complete. There were no survivors to recount the final moments. The recorders provided data, not experience. What the passengers saw or felt in the last seconds is unknown. The cold claimed them instantly. The mountain gave nothing back.